All right. Thank you for everyone who's joining us this evening for our Bible study. I apologize. I'm a couple minutes late getting started. I was here early and was getting ready to get started. And then I don't want to put Lori too far under the bus, but right when I'm getting ready to click go, her and the kids decided now is when they need to play outside and scream loudly like a bunch of crazy people. So I had to go fight my shutter that was stuck and get it closed, and some other stuff to try to keep them from interrupting the Bible study tonight. So if I seem a little grumpy in my face, that's why too, because I hurt my leg trying to close the shutter for the house. Okay, so let's go ahead then and look at our Bible study tonight. I appreciate you being here to be a part of it. Those who come in already, those who are coming in to be part of the Bible study. Today we're actually going to be talking about what really is wisdom. We're actually going to get to, we've already defined what wisdom is as a concept, but now we're going to be looking at the end game of wisdom. Like, what should wisdom really be? What should it really look like when it reaches maturity? I think that's one of the things you have to understand when it comes to learning stuff in the Bible. Is so many times we're so naturally geared. Our way of thinking is that there is this and there's this. There's black and there's white, and we forget that there's a color called gray that exists in the middle. So that in reality, a lot of things, biblically speaking, exist within a spectrum. So, for example, love and hatred exist within a spectrum. It's not just because you hate something doesn't mean that you absolutely despise it with all your being and want it to be destroyed, as you see if you study out the word hate, because God talks about hating family, meaning to love them less than you love Him, wherein other times hatred is used as despising. There's a spectrum of that. Same thing for love. Love, there's Isaac who loves the food that his son makes, and then there's Christ who loved us and gave himself for us. There's a broad spectrum of love from one end of that to the other. There's a lot of things called love in the Bible that God calls them love that you and I wouldn't necessarily do that. The most, let's say, egregious or extreme example of that is Amnon. It says he loved Tamar, and it means that some part of him he did care for her. It's just that over time that became twisted and perverted. So I'm giving those as an example of the fact that biblically a lot of things that we tend to look at it, if you love somebody, it means you automatically must care about them as your own self, and that's not true. That's something God commands you to learn how to do, and to do that. Many of those things exist within a spectrum wherein love is when you go to the positive, hate is when you go to the negative. Wisdom is when you go to the positive of this. Foolishness is when you go to the negative. And it's good to see Florian. I haven't seen you for a long time, so bună ziua, ce faci? I hope you're doing well. I don't know how much you understand between my bad Romanian and English. But anyways, when it comes to wisdom and foolishness, we get the idea that if somebody's foolish, they're automatically doing the most foolish things possible. If somebody is wise, they're automatically going to do the wisest things possible. But that's not true. There is a spectrum to it. And when somebody starts to go in the direction that they begin to gain the ability to use their knowledge, to put it to use and actually make something out of it, you're going in the direction of wisdom. Now, what happens is you have people, like we had somebody comment one time that they were upset because I defined wisdom as something more than just, that the fear of the Lord is wisdom. And that was their verse they were taking, where in reality, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is what starts you on that path, is when your eyes open up to the Creator and you begin to see God. Because the truth is, someone who denies God in their heart is going to twist and break the worldview so much to try to deny God, because the evidence of God is so great and so grand that you have to throw away all use of knowledge in order to deny God. You have to pervert that in your heart. So someone who goes into foolishness, they go that way because of unbelief, because they have denied God in their heart, and they have begun to twist and break and destroy knowledge to where now it doesn't really mean anything. We saw that on Sundays. We talked about frowardness, that as you follow that path, you eventually get to the place where it's not that you lack an ability to use knowledge, it's that you misuse it. You intentionally don't care about the truth. So there's the progression of the fool, which we'll talk about later. In about 2 weeks, I guess, because we have Dr. Martin next week. Now, on the other hand of that, wisdom also has a journey. Just because somebody has wisdom in their heart doesn't mean that they now have, the fullness of what that means to be wise. God's constantly telling you that wisdom grows and that wisdom learns and that wisdom increases, to get you to understand that wisdom is not, oh, I flipped a switch and now I see everything the way God sees it. Wisdom is a journey of learning how to rightly view the world around you and use knowledge correctly. Now, the end game of this, the destination for all of it would be that you as an individual begin to see things the way that God does. Because, of course, God's wisdom is perfect. God's wisdom was used to found the earth. God's wisdom is without flaw. And so as we increase in wisdom, as you go, again, foolishness would be negative, wisdom would be to the positive. So as you go to the positive side of things, you will see that you begin to see things more and more the way God does. And I think that's a very simple explanation. I think it should be easily understood. Now, saying that, let's look at our chart for just a moment to make sure everybody's on board with what I'm talking about here. If you look at this wisdom chart, you'll notice that I've even put it from top to bottom to convey that idea that center line, that black line across the middle, is your 0 point, let's say. And everybody is on one side of that line or the other. You're not going to fit perfectly on 0. You're either somebody who in your heart has denied God, and because you're desperately trying to create a world that exists without the Creator, your ability to use knowledge is destroyed. It's ruined. You can't use the information you have because you don't have the foundational principle. Romans 1 is a great passage for this. Really, if you go in Romans 1, it talks about when they knew not God, professed himself to be wise, they became fools, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really good passage for explaining what I'm talking about right now. But if someone goes in that negative of unbelief, they proceed into foolishness and they lose an ability to actually use knowledge. Their emotions and all these things become the priority because of the fact that they don't know how to use knowledge. In fact, you're going to see that that's actually in the very first step, let's say +1 towards wisdom, it's still going to be that your way of making decisions is going to be very sensual and fleshly, worldly, and even devilish, God says. So you'll see that this is where it comes from, is that direction. But as you go, +1, +2, +3, +4, eventually you graduate from just having an ability to use your knowledge to having a healthy ability, the right ability, which is sound wisdom. So the reason why we come in to use that term, let's go ahead and take that down before I explain a little bit more. The reason why we use that term is because that is the term that's used for it in the book of Proverbs. Now, the primary passage that explains to us what it looks like is in the book of James. But Proverbs does give us a very good starting off point. So let's go back to Proverbs chapter number 2. Proverbs chapter number 2, we've read this passage multiple times. We're going to read all the way down to verse 7, starting in verse 1, though, because I want you to have all the context. My son, if thou wilt receive my words and hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thine ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest her as silver and searchest for her as hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He is a buckler to them that walk uprightly. So God gives wisdom. That's why the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. It is something that God plants, and because wisdom is not something you just know. It's not just something you've learned. It's an ability that's in your heart, and God plants that ability there. And as God grows it, he says he reserves sound wisdom. That's laid up for those who are righteous. That right there, in all honesty, that gives you the definition. Everything you need to know about sound wisdom is contained in that. That sound wisdom is the wisdom that's reserved for those who are right with God, those who are trying to see things God's way. And this is why a lot of times you'll hear preachers give the definition for wisdom. We've talked about that before, that they'll say wisdom is seeing things from God's perspective. And the issue is that they have this binary of black and white mentality where, okay, wisdom means you have to be right. There's no such thing as, a lower level of wisdom, even though the Bible talks about it over and over again. It's this idea that as soon as you have wisdom, you're seeing things from God's perspective, where in reality, the goal of wisdom is to get you to see things from God's perspective, to get you to a place where you're not just able to use your knowledge, but you're able to use it correctly, that you're able to get to where you see things the way that God sees it. And that's when it becomes sound wisdom. Now, the word sound means healthy. It means true. It means correct. It means healthy. It means all those kind of things. So you say a foundation is sound, it's secure. Probably the greatest example of the way the word sound is used in the Bible in this sense is in regards to sound doctrine. Now, it's 4 times, I believe, that's used. The one I wrote down was Titus chapter 2 and verse 1, where he says, "Speak thou the things which becometh sound doctrine." Because, of course, Titus was dealing with people who believed a lot of false doctrine, and Paul's telling him, make sure you speak the things that become or, proper or edifying or beautifying to sound doctrine. So the truth is, biblically, God's saying then that you can have doctrine that's not correct, it's not true, that's not sound. The word doctrine doesn't mean correct by definition. The word doctrine means this is what you believe. This is the key foundational principles to which your faith is held. So you can have doctrine that's false doctrine. You can have doctrine that there's some good in there, but there's still some bad in there. It's a journey to get from seeing things in a worldly way to having true, sound, biblical doctrine. It's something you learn and increase. It's something you grow in throughout your Christian life. You continually should be growing and learning more about God's word. Now, the same way that works with doctrine is what we're seeing here with wisdom. That wisdom goes from just simply being an ability to use your knowledge to being able to use it in a way that's true and correct and healthy and secure, that you don't have to worry about it. That's when it becomes sound wisdom. And God says that's laid up for those who are righteous, those who are trying to do right, those who their hearts are right with God. So that's the first step in understanding sound wisdom and how we get there. The next step, I say, would be the next verse, Proverbs chapter 3. So we're going to read verse 13 for context. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 13 says, "Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding." Now we're going to drop down from here to verse 21, but I want you to understand that everything from verse 13 to verse 21 is still talking about wisdom, and it's still setting this idea that if we will get wisdom, it will make us happier people. It makes your life more blessed. And I guess I can say this as somebody who I consider myself to have, at least a little degree of wisdom even before I became a Christian, that I had a pretty good understanding of the universe around me. I was pretty good at taking the information that was given to me and plugging it in and using it. I had a decent head on my shoulders, is the way we would say it now. In reality, wisdom comes from the heart, but you understand what I mean by that. So that when somebody would tell me stuff and I realized, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not how this works. I had an ability to do that. And that's actually what led me to become a Christian. So I know this, that even before I got to a place where my, let's say, wisdom began to line up more with God's. Now, whether I would be arrogant enough to say I have sound wisdom tonight or not, I'm not going to do that. But I'll say it's certainly better than where I was when I started. Now, before I got to that point, though, I can say even when I had the most basic forms of wisdom, when I was just barely getting to a place where I could take the things that I had been taught, like I could go to school, learn all this stuff about, the laws of motion and the laws of physics and the way that the universe is made. And then instead of just taking it and trying to twist it and break it and make it, use it as an excuse to deny God, to take that and then use it to actually say, well, wait a minute, if the laws of motion say that an object in motion will stay in motion, why did planet suddenly stop? And, why did all this dust just stop and start forming together in certain spots? That's where you see even the beginnings of that. And even that beginning of wisdom that would allow me to take that and, make those considerations, or even sometimes it's going to be understanding that's being used in some of those situations. it made me a happier person. It was a joyous thing to me to actually be able to see the truth and not be so easily misled. And I'm going to say, like Sunday, I jumped on a little bit about um, conspiracy theories, because the fact that most time people who are really big in conspiracy theories have a problem that they run from one news station all the way to another one because it's more in line with what they want to believe. And so, they get their car out of one ditch on one side of the road and put it in the ditch on the other side of the road, because they don't realize that both of these stations are liars. I mean, I'll give my example is that during the last election, Newsmax was new, and so they were being advertised as being better than all these others, that they're going to tell the truth. And so for a moment, I said, okay, I'll give these guys a chance, and I listened to them. And it didn't take me long to realize, well, no, they have their agendas just like everybody else, and they're liars just like all the other news stations. And so I immediately backed away and got back to the point where I realized these things were a waste of my time. Now, saying all of that is to get to this point. The reason why a lot of people are quick to jump to those things is because of the fact that they have enough wisdom to realize that, okay, what I'm being told over here doesn't add up. Like if I try to put those blocks together, they don't fit. And so because of that, you start looking for another source. Now, the danger is that you run to one that gives you what sounds like what you want to hear. And so you start believing that. Now, that's where you start getting into conspiracy theory stuff, which has come up multiple times lately. I don't remember what I was even teaching on in an online study that came up the other day. But anyways, that aside, noting these things, what you have to consider is that wisdom does make us step back and start looking at the way this stuff fits and start trying to put the pieces together in the right order. When you have that, it makes you happy. I mean, it gives you a joy in this life. You're not just going around, taking what everybody else gives you and believing it simple-mindedly, but you're actually, doing something. And it's like anything in this life, when you start figuring something out, you start putting together a puzzle, it's joyous to you. And so a wise life is going to be a happier life. But as I said, he doesn't just say that in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 13. He continues all the way down to verse 21, and that's where I'm going to pick back up. He says, "My son, let not them depart from thine eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. So shall they be life unto thy soul and grace to thy neck. Then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. Then when thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet." Now consider what he's telling you. If wisdom makes you happy, if it's gonna make you happier to be able to actually step back and begin to see the world for what it is and be able to use your knowledge and put it together correctly, he says sound wisdom is going to make you healthy. Whereas one makes you happy, it's a joyous thing for you to sit back and pick apart the problems and put together the puzzle pieces and realize that, this is not right and so forth. So again, even as an unbeliever, to begin to unravel the problems and realize that, there was issues in what was being taught to me in school concerning the way the universe existed, and then take what wisdom I had, even though I didn't have the Bible to really help me at that point, I still was able to put together and realize, wait a minute, everything supports that there's a creator. That was joyous to me. It was an enjoyable thing. Where on the other hand, as my wisdom solidifies and becomes more sound and lines up more and more with God's, it's not just about being happy. It's not just about pursuing that which, I enjoy looking into, what I enjoy studying, what I enjoy, learning more about. It actually becomes more about what is proper and what is correct and what's going to help me to have a better life and so forth. And that's why, to be honest with you, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I said this Sunday, it was the timing of my message Sunday is a little bit unfortunate just because there's at least 6 or 7 people who could have felt like they were being targeted by it. And it actually made it hard for me to preach it because if I used any of the normal examples I would use, I would actually been stepping on somebody's toes, because I've had those conversations with somebody recently. Every one of the things I would normally use to illustrate that message. And I told Lori it was one of the harder messages I've preached, even though it should have been easy because of that. So same thing here, same disclaimer. We're talking about something where this is the best way to illustrate this. So I'm not trying to pick on conspiracy theory people, But if all you ever reach to in your journey of wisdom is a place where you can realize that you're being lied to, and you enjoy looking at these things over here and trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle to figure out how you were lied to, then you're still on the lower spectrum of wisdom. It's just about the happiness there. When you get to the place where wisdom realizes that kind of stuff's usually not as important as you think it is, some of it is, especially when it regards to the Bible. We're talking about conspiracies about governments and stuff. You're just wasting your time and your energy on that. But when you get to a place where your wisdom is no longer about trying to, figure out those kind of things, but it's about trying to figure out the things that actually matter in life and trying to understand God's word and trying to line up your perspective more with his, that's where you're reaching a healthier place in your journey of wisdom. That's why it goes from happy to healthy. As it matures, wisdom becomes more healthy than it is about being just happy. That's something to understand too. Then Proverbs chapter 8, verse 12 through verse 14. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and find out knowledge of witty inventions. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate. Counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding, I have strength. Now, that's the transition part of this chapter, because this chapter, the first half is dealing with wisdom, and it's the personification of wisdom, speaking as a sister, and then the next one, is understanding, speaking as your kinswoman. And the first half is personifying wisdom. The second half is personifying understanding. Since I'm picking on people and using examples that may be a little bit close to home for some people. I actually had somebody one time try to tell me that this passage was about Jesus. And it's like, you just showed that you don't have anything from this passage if you try to take this and make it about Jesus. This is talking about wisdom in the first half and understanding in the second half. That these are things that didn't have to be created because God is by nature wise and by nature understanding. Just like holiness didn't have to be created, God by nature is holy. If you think about it, there's some things that didn't have to be created because they're naturally ingrained in who God is. Now, I won't get into that because it's definitely not my lesson tonight. But the idea of wisdom being there from the beginning and understanding is what's going on in this passage. But I read that transitional part of it because I wanted you to see that when wisdom and understanding are allowed to grow, sound wisdom is a product of that. So the truth is, I don't think, if you think about the chart that I have there, wisdom and understanding are side by side. They're colored the same because they grow together. They both grow in a heart that's been touched by the fear of the Lord. And so as a result of that, I don't think you could ever truly achieve sound wisdom without having a healthy amount of understanding. Like your wisdom will never be to a place where it's really lining up with God's perspective until you have with it a healthy amount of understanding as well. That's something to understand about the journey of wisdom, is that you have to increase in both of them in order to be sound in wisdom. And we'll see to be sound in understanding, which will lead into being will lead into humility. That also is going to have to be accompanied by a healthy dose of wisdom. It's not that you have to max out wisdom, let's say, or you have to max out understanding to progress in the other. If I put this in video game terms, it's not that you have to max one out, both of them out to achieve the next level in one. It's that you have to grow them together, and it's okay that one's a little higher than the other, but they do have to both grow together. They're dependent upon one another in order to reach this level of healthiness. Now, saying all of that, I said our primary passage that really would help us to understand what sound wisdom is James chapter 3. So James chapter 3 is where we're going to finally get to see what true, like the final point of wisdom looks like. Like if you follow wisdom to the point of where this is what God would have you to be, this is what you get. And it's defined by the fact that he says this is the wisdom that comes from above. So we'll start in verse 13, though. It says, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. So he's saying if there's somebody who claims they're wise, let them show that. It should be demonstrated. Wisdom is not something that only rests in the heart. We've seen this. A wise man speaks wisely. He acts wisely. I mean, everything about his conversation, which is what he's talking about here, the things you communicate, whether verbally or non-verbally, everything about him, his demeanor, all of it will reflect that. And again, the entire book of Proverbs says that over and over again. I don't have to go through that much because that's, if you've read Proverbs at all, you know that. So he's saying that if somebody amongst you is wise, let them show that through their wisdom and their behavior, the way they communicate. But also he adds in this idea about meekness. So let's look at that again. He says, let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. So here's the thing you have to understand. Like, meekness is not talked about much in Proverbs. However, as you come into your New Testament, it is a very important thing. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit, and it's one of the most important fruits of the Spirit, because meekness is what allows us to be teachable. And so, I guess in truth, meekness and humility are not the same thing, but I would say that in some degree, humility is almost used in the place of meekness. It's not in the place of, but a lot of the things I would use meekness to say about wisdom in the New Testament and about learning in the New Testament, humility is used to say that in the Old Testament. And that's, I think, primarily because of the fact that, or at least in the book of Proverbs, I think it's primarily because of the fact that you have a scorner. As he progresses, he gets proud and haughty. Understanding progresses into humility. And I think it's because it's showing you that meekness in a lot of ways is this combination of understanding that has grown into humility. So it's kind of like the changeover point of that. But we understand that meekness is an ability to be teachable. It's ability to rein in your abilities and be teachable. So saying that, he says the real indication of someone's wisdom will not just be what they communicate, but the way in which they learn, how teachable they are. And so it's almost a warning here to everyone that, if you sit back and you scoff at what I've tried to show you and you don't want to hear it, that maybe you should take a better evaluation of your heart and ask, are you as wise as you think you are? Because this is what wisdom does. It learns, it grows, it takes in the information, it considers it, and so forth. All right. So continuing the thought, he gives you, let's say, the beginning point of wisdom. And in reality, what he describes here is, if you're going to call it wisdom at all, which he does, it is the bare minimum. I mean, you're 0.1. You're not even to the first level of what most of us would think of as wisdom at this point. He says, but if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Now, consider what he's talking about here. He's saying that if these fleshly works and evil things are there, it's because you don't actually have godly wisdom, which is why he began with the thought of, if you think you're wise, step back and reconsider and learn, be meek enough to listen. Now, what he describes as far as a beginning point, like the basic jumping off point of any wisdom, I guess you can say, is he says at that point, foolishness is that you don't have an ability to use your knowledge. So wisdom is an ability to use it, but he's saying when you first take that, half a step into wisdom, you have not begun to line up with God's wisdom yet. That's why the next verse says wisdom comes from above. So, we'll get there in a moment. But you have to understand this, that wisdom is essentially in a lot of ways your worldview, not because that's all that wisdom is, but because since wisdom is the way that you apply knowledge, it is the way that you use what you know, it then becomes the filter by which you see the world around you. Because everything you learn and everything you know and every bit of knowledge you increase in, you begin to use your wisdom to determine how to use that. And so wisdom is in many ways your worldview. Whatever level or lack of wisdom you have becomes your view of the world. And so when you're going down into foolishness, the issue is that, it doesn't matter what you know because you don't know how to use it. And you're going to misuse it, you're going to mistreat it, and you're going to put out all these crazy things. Whereas that first step, you still have a lot of that. Even when you first take your first step towards wisdom, you're now learning how to use knowledge. The issue is, and in truth, if you wanted to argue that this is still foolishness, I wouldn't argue with you. My issue would be that God does use the word wisdom here. that first step, that starting off point, let's say that zero line if you want to, is that at that point you're getting an ability to use your knowledge, but it's not based on what's right and what's true. It's based off of what feels good, that's sensual, your fleshly feelings. It's based off of the world and the way the world sees stuff. So, how does society feel about this? What does society say about this? And it's based off of devilish things, the things that the devil has indoctrinated you with and taught you. So God's showing you that even in your beginning of your journey to wisdom, to true sound wisdom, you start off very far from seeing things the way God does. Your first steps in that journey, you're still going to be looking at what feels good to you. You're still going to be making a lot of your decisions and using your knowledge based off of a worldview wherein your feelings actually matter more than the truth. You're going to be going on that journey, starting off with struggling with this idea that society says this. How can all these scientists be wrong? How can how could the school be wrong? How could this be wrong? And you're going to be influenced by that, and also by the things you've been indoctrinated by the devil. Because the truth is, the devil is blinding the hearts and minds of people according to the Bible, and he does indoctrinate you. From the time you're born, you've been getting indoctrinated by devilish things and don't even realize it. Everything you watch, everything you do that the world's giving you, the devil's using it to indoctrinate in some way. Even a lot of stuff going on in churches is being used of the devil to indoctrinate people with lies. Now, saying that, what that should show you is, one, it should convict you if you're not taking steps forward, but it should encourage you if you're trying to grow. And for me, I guess I could put it like this. I've met some people who I have no question about their salvation. I see that they're trying to grow in Christ. They're trying to be wise. And I've watched them across time that I've known them, across a period of years or sometimes less. I've watched them go from where their ability to use knowledge is based off of their feelings. They're struggling with actually coming to the right conclusion, although they're doing the right steps. They're using the right scientific method. The problem is they forgot to take their feelings out of it, which we understand is one of the foundational things of wisdom. So because of that, you'll see this person that they're on the right path, but they still can't come to the right conclusion because their feelings are messing up the equation. Or something that they learn from the world, especially like with being a ministry that we've dealt with a lot of students. I've seen that a lot with students, especially in regards to like evolution versus creation, that there's things that they were taught in school, and it's just hard to take a step away from that. It's hard for them to take that first step, but that's why wisdom is a journey. And the truth is, even that it's maybe a little harder to illustrate the part about the things you've been indoctrinated with by the devil, as we tend to automatically jump with our mind to the most evil things. But there's things, evolution itself is something that's not just societally indoctrinated to you, it's devilishly indoctrinated. But there's things, like religious things, there's a lot of stuff that the devil indoctrinates people with. And you've come to believe that. There's people who believe stuff about the Bible is never said. It's not in the Bible anywhere at all. But they believe the Bible says it because they were indoctrinated with that. And so what God is telling you is your first steps as you're growing, as you're getting out of foolishness and going into wisdom, is foolishness is going to be driven by those things. Because foolishness doesn't have an ability to apply knowledge, it's going to be driven by your feelings and desires. It's going to be driven by what the world teaches. It's going to be driven by what the devil has indoctrinated with. And that it's going to be truly given to that. And God's warning you that when you first started trying to pull yourself out of foolishness and grow into wisdom, you're going to struggle with that. You're going to have to let go of some things that you learned in society. You're going to have to let go of some feelings about certain things. And you're going to have to come to a place where truth is what matters. Truth is the foundation. Truth is the thing upon which everything else rests. And little by little, you'll get there. You don't go immediately from, okay, I grew up in the world, don't know anything about the Bible, to, okay, now I know everything about the Bible, and I see everything from God's perspective. I've been preaching for around 20 years at this point, been saved for over 20 years. And I can say, as someone who was not a Christian nor had, any real Christian values or things myself, and just some basic stuff, because of that, I didn't just suddenly get saved and go from, okay, I'm foolish to I'm wise. It was something where little by little, those things that I had been indoctrinated with, those devilish things that were instilled in me, God stripped those away. Those places where the worldly things were influencing my view and the way that I, used my knowledge, those were stripped away. Those places where my feelings and my, opinions and all that kind of stuff were influencing and overriding the actual truth that was right there in front of me, they started to be stripped away. And the truth is, as you go down the road of wisdom, that's what's going to happen. All that kind of stuff is going to be stripped away so that you get to a point where when your wisdom is sound, you're able to see the knowledge for what it truly is and use it for what it truly is. That's the goal, the destination of wisdom. That's what sound wisdom becomes. So now saying that, or that's what wisdom becomes, is it becomes sound wisdom, I should probably say. Let's look at verse 17 of James chapter 3. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. So think about this for just a moment. God says that when wisdom gets to a point where it's godly wisdom, it's sound wisdom, this is the kind of wisdom that's not still being corrupted by your opinions and the world and the devil, but it's got to a place where you're actually seeing things the way God does. He says that wisdom is going to be, first of all, pure. So as you're taking your knowledge and you're being influenced by your opinions or the world or the devil, that's going to be impure. You'll be able to do something with that knowledge, but a lot of times your opinions are going to be tainted. They're going to be, marred. They're going to be poisoned a little bit. There'll be a little leaven in there, something that's going to mess it up. And as you grow more in true wisdom, you're going to get to a place where that stuff goes away, and wisdom becomes that which is pure. I would think of Proverbs 21:30, where he talks about wisdom, that there is no wisdom nor understanding nor counsel against God. And the idea that wisdom, as it, in a pure form, true wisdom, it's never going to go against God, neither understanding nor good, true counsel. And, there are things that may be called wisdom, may be called counsel, may be called understanding, the barest, the minimalist form of them, that they may, still struggle to follow God. But true wisdom is going to line up with God. That's where it's going to. It's going to be pure because it's going to follow what God says. It's not going to be tainted by opinions and so forth. Then the next thing he says about it is that it is gentle. So wisdom at its purest form is not, me trying to beat you over the head with my opinions and stuff, but it's something where it's actually, I think of when God tells us to let our words be seasoned with salt. That God teaches us to speak graciously. Wisdom also, because it instructs our lips, it informs our mouth, it determines the way that we speak. You see that a wise person, many times as you go through Proverbs, for example, a wise man will speak graciously. A wise man will give a soft answer, because a soft answer turns away strife. It cuts a little bit of the edge off of the way we speak, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It helps us to speak in a way that's much more gentle, wherein we're not trying to beat people over the head with what we know. We're trying to actually help them. And it's very much the way you see somebody who actually has a child and knows how to deal with that child. They don't just try to beat them over the head with what they know. They actually try to teach them and help them to understand why some things are the way they are. That's what true wisdom will make us to do. Then you see that it is, I skipped over peaceable, actually, I'm sorry, that you'll see it's peaceable before it's gentle, that it's peaceable. And peaceable is something that works to create peace, not peaceful. Don't make a mistake there. Peaceful is a little bit different. Peaceable is something that works to create peace. So you'll also see that throughout Proverbs, that wisdom in a more pure form, as it goes to what it's supposed to be, and not just that, bare form where it's still influenced by our opinions and so forth. When it reaches a sound level, wisdom will be peaceable at that point. It'll be something that produces peace. And my example is about a soft answer turning away strife. A wise man thinks to get before he gives an answer. He holds his peace and holds it until afterwards and so forth. All of that is examples of how Proverbs explains that works. Easy to be entreated. The idea of this is that sound wisdom is something where, like, if you come and you have questions and you want to know and you want to learn from it, it's easy. It's accessible. So as someone who wisdom becomes more sound, they'll also become more open to teach and share and instruct others. Wise man will be sparing with his word, the Bible teaches, but he is willing to help others to grow in wisdom. Then it says also full of mercy and good fruits. So there will be a lot of mercy in wisdom, which kind of goes back to the ideas of what I was saying with being gentle. Someone who has true, like, sound wisdom, that wisdom that comes from God, that person is going to realize the need to show mercy to others. In fact, you'll notice that throughout the book of Proverbs, I should say, that there is almost any passage where wisdom is being talked about, mercy is somewhere close in proximity. Because someone who's wise realizes that you have to show mercy to people. If you want mercy, you got to give mercy. You got to be understanding, and so forth. In fact, actually, understanding and mercy are the two that really do go hand in hand together. That's more so truth and wisdom and mercy. But because wisdom and understanding are going to grow together, mercy is also going to be a product of someone who has sound wisdom. And then good fruits is, of course, the fact that wisdom is going to help you to produce things that are good. Your language is going to be good. What you're doing with your language is going to be good. The fruit of your wisdom is going to be good. Without partiality and without hypocrisy are two very important things here, because that actually goes back to the basic definition of wisdom, wherein you had justice, which lines up with being pure, like pure and peaceable and so forth, or just pure, let's say. And then judgment lines up with the idea of being peaceable and gentle and easy to be entreated and so forth. But equity was that last part of it, wherein equity is, you having an ability to take your opinions and your emotions and your desires and so forth out of the equation and just weigh the matters for what they really are. In this case, that's what when he says impartial, it means you'll have no partiality. It's not, let's say, as far as I know, Mike, Nick, and Sophania and Rebecca are all here. So since Sophania and Rebecca are together, I'm pick on Sophania and leave Rebecca alone, as I normally do. Let's say Mike and Nick and Sophania are all in an argument, and they can't agree about something. And let's say, hypothetically, for this cause, that I liked, I'll pick Mike so I don't hurt his feelings. I'm joking. I'll say that I like Mike the most, and then Nick was next, and then Sophania was last, because he doesn't mind. He won't cry if I call him last, since it's a hypothetical. If it was real, he might be upset. But let's say in that scenario, they're in a debate, and they need a judge to come in and settle this for them. That partiality, wherein hypothetically, you're not reality, I liked one of them more than the others, would not come into my judgment. I would be able to make that decision without ever letting that affect it. And that's sound wisdom. Really, that's one of the greatest, most important things about sound wisdom, is that it is, without partiality. And then that without hypocrisy. Of course, hypocrisy is where, in this case, it's more so the idea that one thing's okay for me, but it's not okay for you. So when you're making your decisions and stuff, you're going to hold yourself to the standard of what's true, because truth becomes the foundational principle as your wisdom solidifies and becomes more sound. And that's very important as you go to study the other direction, when foolishness becomes the progression of that, which is frowardness, because that's the abandonment of truth. That's the where truth no longer matters. As wisdom solidifies and becomes more sound, it becomes more about what is true. And because it's about the truth, it allows us to measure things without having to put our opinions in it. And it allows us to hold ourselves to the right standards. It makes it pure so that there's no, impurities there. And with that, of course, comes that gentleness, that easily entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, peaceable, all that kind of stuff, because truth is not necessarily always going to be the most peaceable thing, but truth is truth. And if we can all settle on that, then we have that authority, and it does settle a lot of the issues for us, I guess you could say. All right, so that's the end of what I have written down for notes. I thought it was going to be a shorter lesson than what it was. It took me longer to get through that. But the short answer, if you're typing a question, I'll say this as I give people a chance to type any questions they have. The short answer to sound wisdom is that it's wisdom that has lined up with what God sees, and it lines up with God's point of view. It's seeing things the way God does, because truth becomes the central core of your wisdom. It's no longer influenced by your feelings. It's no longer influenced by what the world feels about this. It's no longer influenced by what the devil has indoctrinated. And that's why, like, if you ever find yourself arguing something and your logic is based off of, well, the society says this, or I feel this, or you find yourself referencing some extra biblical source. You're depending on, well, the Catholics, or this, or that, this religion, or so forth, and you start trying to find your arguments from that kind of stuff. Well, then that at this point you have went away from wisdom. That's, you're not relying on true sound wisdom. True sound wisdom will be based on the truth, and because of that, it's going to line up with God's point of view, because now you and God are both working from the truth. So that's the thing to understand about it. That's the short and simple answer to all the long explanation I just gave you, is that the journey to sound wisdom is when your worldview, your perspective, the way that you take knowledge and apply it and use it is no longer influenced at all by any of your partialities or indoctrinations or any of that kind of stuff, but it's only about the truth. That's when you can call wisdom sound wisdom. The main thing I wanted to really emphasize in this lesson is the fact that it is a journey. You don't just flip a switch and, okay, now I'm wise. And because I'm wise, it's all sound wisdom. It's a journey. You take steps away from foolishness and towards sound wisdom. And if you think just because you're a little more wise than somebody down the street, that means that you're wise, the truth is you probably are not as far along the journey as you think you are. And you need to keep growing and asking God to help you increase in wisdom. The good news, as I always say, though, is that God says he gives it liberally and upbraideth not. So be quick to ask him. He says it's reserved, though. Sound wisdom is reserved for the righteous. So the truth is, you'll never get all the way there until your heart is right with God, and you'll not get all the way there until your desire actually is to do that which is right. All right, that's all I have to say about it tonight. I don't see any questions coming in. I showed that I had a number of people here, but other than a few comments in the beginning, it felt like I was by myself up until just a minute ago when Rebecca responded to something I said. So anyways, if you're still here, if you have any questions, you can try to ask them quick. If you were typing, I'll still try to answer them for you. If not, you can leave the amen in the comments. Let me know that you actually made it to the end of this. But I appreciate you joining to be a part of the study with us. I hope that it's been insightful and helped you to maybe reevaluate where you are in terms of wisdom, because many times we are quick to think that we've got it all figured out, when in reality we still need to take a few more steps. All right, so everybody who I know was here said that they made it to the end. They're still here. I don't see any questions coming in. I appreciate everyone who came to be part of the study with us. I hope that, like I said, it's been a help for you and encourages you to take a few more steps in the right direction in terms of how you use your knowledge, in terms of the wisdom that you have. Thank you for joining. We look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow evening at church who's able to be there. If not, make sure you try to be online for the live stream. But if you can be there in person. But you go ahead and have a good evening today.